welcome to this session of AAC in the Cloud. Our presenter for this session will be Emily Diaz, and we'll turn the time over to her.
Thank you so much. Sorry for the delay, guys. We are talking this evening about AAC coaching and the Enneagram, kind of an interesting duo there. We're going to be exploring buy-in type by personality type. Sorry, not buy-in type, buy-in by personality type. So I am all set up here finally. Hopefully you can see everything just fine and hear me just fine. I have my notes over here, so if you see me looking to the side, that's what I'm checking on. I have Slack on my phone down here, so we should be good to go. I'm flexing a little bit of my Enneagram type 1 right now. And since I have Slack open, if you would let me know who you are you an SLP, a teacher, para, a parent? And if you happen to know your Enneagram number, go ahead and put that in the Slack channel so I can see who is joining me live today. Before we dig in, I'm gonna go ahead and check in on Slack, make sure we're good. We're here now. I see people typing. Got SLPs here, type 2, an AT specialist, SLP 3 wing 2. If you don't know what you are, that's totally fine too. I think you might learn a little bit about yourself in this session today. SPED teacher, type 8, SLP, more SLPs, AAC specialists. Not sure what you are, that's totally fine. Sister of an AAC user and speech sciences student. That is awesome. So glad you're here. See some more people typing. The Enneagram is kind of like my nerdy topic that I like to dig into. And I know it's a little bit unconventional to be presenting about AAC and like personality types. If you were hoping for something more about like coaching buy-in tips, that's my presentation from last year, and you can always check that out. But we're going to take a little bit of a different angle on coaching and buy-in today. Awesome. We have parents of an AAC user and an SLP here. Type 2. Cool. All right. I figured we'd have a lot of like type 2s, type 3s, and you'll know why in a second. So keep telling me who you are and if you know your Enneagram type in the Slack channel, and I'm going to move forward with the presentation. If I can get it to go to the next slide. There we go. All right, the boring stuff before we dig in. My financial relationships. I am the owner of Emily Diaz SLP. That's me. I do professional development and trainings for SLPs, teachers, and parents. I also run an Etsy shop with apparel for those types of people. And my non-financial relationships, I'm an ASHA member and a SIG 12 member. I work for, oh, this is a little extra than is on the slide, but I see people still sharing who they are and their types. Oh, we got some type 9s in the house. Awesome. My husband is a type 9, so very familiar with that type. It's also where I go when I'm stressed out, and we'll learn more about the stress types and your growth types and things like that today. But about me, I just finished year 6 as an SLP in a school setting. I work mostly with older students, like high school, middle school. I cover our 18+ transition program. I do a little bit of residential treatment center, and I also consult district-wide to support AAC on all of our campuses. All right, so learning objectives for today. Move myself over here. You know how it is on Zoom, guys. All right, there we go. You can't see what I'm seeing, but skill 1, we are going to explore the 9 personality types of the Enneagram, including strengths, weaknesses, fears, and desires. So if you don't know about the Enneagram, there's 9 different types that are all kind of interconnected. And I'm going to touch on strengths, weaknesses, fears, and desires, but I'm probably going to spend a little bit of extra time on weaknesses, because this is about how we are going to grow and how we are going to get better buy-in and be better AAC coaches. So if I talk a little bit about the weaknesses of each type a little bit too long, that's why it might get a little uncomfortable and a little personal. But my tip for you is to look at the descriptions of each type as we dig into them very objectively, especially when it comes to those weaknesses. Skill 2 that we are going to learn today is understand how each Enneagram type can be expressed by SLPs, teachers, and parents. And I know there are other people who work with AAC users, but these are the 3 that we are going to kind of touch on today. And I'm sure you'll find yourself fitting in one of those categories, even if you aren't exactly one of those categories. And I also wanted to include the Enneagram is not just like an AAC thing. That's why I said this is a little bit of an unconventional presentation. The Enneagram it can be applied in many facets. But for the presentation today, the focus is going to be how Enneagram types are expressed by these types of people. OTs are not included on this list, but whoever you are that's watching today. Skill 3, analyze coaching relationships based on your Enneagram type and how to work better together. So we're going to do some self-reflection today, learn a little bit about yourself and what type you think you might be. You might be able to hypothesize what some other people, what their types are, people that you live with, people that you work with, and being able to analyze that along with your coaching relationship kind of helps you grow in buy-in and how you work together as a team. Got a type 7 here. You'll have to retake the test. Yes, at the end, I'm going to share resources. So if you have no idea what you are, you'll get a good picture of it today. And at the end, you can take that free test. So you might know a little bit more. So our big goal here today is to familiarize yourself with your types so that you can grow as an individual and in your coaching experience. Next slide, there we go. All right, so some things we won't really get into today, but I want to make sure to at least touch on because they are part of the Enneagram. The first one is levels of development. And so for each personality type that we are going to talk about, there's this internal structure that ranges from a really healthy version of that type to average to a really unhealthy version of that type. So like I said, we're not going to get into that today, but know that that exists, so like really healthy version to unhealthy. The 3 instincts, we aren't going to really get into that today. Just know that each type has 3 instincts. They're all the same. It's self-preservation, sexual, or like more intimate one-on-one, and a social instinct. And everyone has one that is more dominant than the others. And then with these 3 instincts per 9 type, that creates 27 subtypes in the Enneagram. So when you take the 27 subtypes and the internal structure that ranges all the way from healthy to unhealthy, you can get some really wide variations going on there. So that's why you might meet somebody who is a type 3, and you might meet somebody else who's a type 3, and they're like completely different. That's why. And lastly, the centers, we're not going to talk about that much today. Each center consists of 3 personality types that have like common assets and liabilities of that center. Somebody asked in the Slack channel if I am an Enneagram coach. I am not. It may or may not be on my bucket list. It's something that I've really explored deeply for the past few years. My husband's very knowledgeable on the Enneagram also. He has personally worked with an Enneagram coach before. That's something I would love to look into and kind of tie together AAC coaching and Enneagram coaching because I think it fills in some gaps. Disclaimer before we get started, I'm about to dive into our 9 types. I love this quote. It's from Ian Morgan Cron. He's like the Enneagram guy. I'm going to share one of his, at least 2 of his resources at the end. But he says the Enneagram doesn't put you in a box. It shows you the box that you're already in and how to get out of it. And I love that quote. So just know that I am not here today to define you. Some people really don't like personality tests and kind of what it reveals about them. Some people say that the Enneagram, people use it as a crutch to make an excuse for why they are the way that they are. But just know there's a lot of variations to the Enneagram types that we're going to talk about because of these levels of development and instincts, and we're barely going to scratch the surface today. So let's dig in. Oh, just kidding. I have one more. I've squeezed this in. So if you download the slides, you don't have this one yet, but it's a post from my Instagram account. I posted this the other day. Just kind of like a fun summary breakdown of what each type looks like implementing AAC. And most people who know their type look at this and think, oh my God, yeah, that's totally me. So I'll run through this super quick. I know we got started a little bit late, but I think that they're pretty spot on. You let me know in the Slack channel, if you know your type and you're reading this right now, did I nail it or did I miss? So type 1s might say, we need to trial at least 3 devices and find the perfect fit. Okay, type 2s might say, just let me know if you need anything at all, okay? Type 3s might say, I can definitely beat the goal of modeling 200 times per day. Also, if you don't know your type, this might give you a little hint to like, oh, that's probably me. Type 4s might say, this week's consult is a feelings check-in. So how are you doing? Type 5s might say, the research says we should model without expectation. Type 2, I'm feeling attacked. I'm sorry, I don't mean to attack. Type 6, here's the core word of the week calendar for the next 3 months. Type 7, I have a super fun and engaging activity for us to do today. Type 8 might say, just make sure you do it the way that I told you to do it. And type 9, I'm worried I'll step on a teacher's toes if I push in for therapy. So let me know in the Slack channel if you're feeling personally victimized by your Enneagram type and AAC implementation. If you have no idea what this is, we're about to dig in. So let's get started with our type 1s, also known as the reformer. So on the left-hand side over here, for each type, we're gonna talk about basic desire, basic fear, strengths and weaknesses, and then we're gonna move over to the right here to this fun little diagram, and I'll explain what all those arrows and lines mean in a minute. But here we go, type 1, the reformer. Their basic desire is to be good, to be responsible, and to get things right, which means that their basic fear is making mistakes, being wrong, or corrupt. Now I have to let you guys know, I am an Enneagram type 3 through and through. But when I take my Enneagram test, it ranks me as a 3, like right here, and then it ranks me as a 1, like right here. So I tend to relate to the type 1 descriptions a lot. So when we were running behind and things were not going right with Zoom, I was like, oh my God, this is a mistake. What's happening? I can't fix it. Somebody's gonna fix it. It's okay. I have to lean into where I go in stress, which is more a laid back version of myself. We'll get there later. But anyway, I had all my stuff set up. I'm telling you guys, I've got my notes over here. I've got my Slack channel here. I've got my slides up here. Very, very disciplined and responsible with this. All right, so our strengths as 1s, you are self-disciplined, you are mature. People probably told you from a young age, like, oh my gosh, you're so mature for your age. You're very objective. You can be very responsible and very inspiring. Some weaknesses for our type 1s are that they can sometimes become rigid or inflexible. They can have a tendency to be a little self-righteous, maybe a little obsessive about things. They can be intolerant or judgmental of others at times. So I'm going to move over to this diagram here. So the numbers, those are our 9 types on the outside. I'll just give you a little overview of that. And the lines are how they are all like interconnected, like I said. I drew the arrows on because for each type, I want you to know what the wings are. Okay, that's the number that falls on either side of the type. And you can have a tendency to kind of tap into either one of those. And then the arrows in the middle are showing our growth number or number of integration and our stress number or our number of disintegration. So a warning about the wings, because here, let me just explain it. You might not access your wings at all. I personally, as a type 3, when we get there, I'll show you what those wings are. I don't access my wings very much. You might access them both equally, and that's a pretty healthy version of yourself. Or you may access one more than the other. And if you're like me, you access your runner-up number, like the number that you scored second on your test, more than you do your wings. So for me, I access a lot of type 1 qualities. That's my runner-up number. All right, so let me tell you about these growth and stress. So we know what a type 1 is, their desires, fears, strengths, and weaknesses. So when a type 1 is growing and they're very, very healthy, they may move toward a type 7, which we'll get there, but they move from these things like being inflexible or obsessive to being more spontaneous and more joyful. It's when they're growing, okay? When they're stressed out, like in the middle of a pandemic, maybe, anybody? They move to a type 4, and instead of being very disciplined and objective, they can become very moody and irrational at times. So this is our description of the type 1. And then for each number, I'm going to give you some coaching and some buy-in tips for SLPs, teachers, paras, and for parents. Plug yourself in there somewhere that applies. I think all of these descriptions that I put in here probably apply to everybody, not just that one specific type. So for SLPs, I'm talking to you. I saw on the Slack channel, we've got a bunch of SLPs here today. For SLPs, ones have a lot to teach others, but keep in mind that what seems obvious to you may not be so obvious to others. And my tip for you would be, don't expect others to change immediately. Just because things don't change immediately doesn't mean they aren't working or that they won't eventually change. Let me click back. A lot of times we're afraid of making mistakes or being wrong, right? That was the fear of a type 1. And so if things don't change immediately after like your first coaching session or your first training, you may think that's a reflection on you, like, oh, I didn't do a great job. I made a mistake. That lesson plan sucked. That activity that I brought in was not the one. I got to completely change up what I'm doing in order to make change. And that's not always the case. Just got to give it some time, right? Teachers or paras, as teachers or paras, ones can be perfectionists when it comes to implementing AAC, which may be for SLPs why we don't see change immediately. They want to get it perfect. So it's important to remind the teachers and paraprofessionals that you're working with that it's okay to have fun and make mistakes while modeling. Ones can have this tendency to want everything to be perfect. Like as teachers, they want their lesson plan, the modeling, the behavior, all of it to be perfect. And if one of those things breaks down, then it wasn't perfect. And that's a lot of pressure to put on yourself as a teacher. And so give yourself some grace, make it a little more fun. It's okay to make mistakes while modeling. One thing that I really like to do when I'm modeling, and I make a ton of mistakes when I'm modeling, is model the mistake. I'll say, like, if I do a miss hit, I don't even know what I'd be trying to say, but I'm thinking like morning meeting. If I say today is Wednesday, actually today is Wednesday, that wasn't a mistake. Thursday, and I say, oops, made a mistake. That's not today. Today is Wednesday. I'm looking for Wednesday, right? Like it's okay to have fun and make mistakes. You can kind of practice that if you're a type 1 or not. That's great for everybody. And as parents, ones can sometimes have high expectations of their child's teacher or their SLP. They want things done correctly. They want things done with a purpose, and they may have very strict perspectives on AAC. And so my advice for parents would be that if you're using AAC at home, set a time to do something structured a few times a day, like where you can plan a fun activity. You could try to keep it all perfect, but know that kids are spontaneous and whimsical, and then just have fun with it the rest of the time, and that's okay. So there's our type 1s in a nutshell. Let me know in the Slack channel what you think about type 1s. I didn't see if we had any type 1s in here. I think we're going to hit on the 2s and 3s next, which I think we have quite a few of. But I know I can relate to these, and I think I have some type 1 teachers that I work with. All right, type 2s. We got any type 2s in the house? I think I saw some of you guys chime in. Some wing 2s maybe. Allie, you said you're a type 2. When I take the test, it tells me that a type 2 is my wing. So I occasionally can tap into this. One of my very good SLP friends is a very hard type 2. She's probably going to watch the replay and know that I'm talking about her right now. But type 2s, they are our helpers. Their basic desire is to feel loved and to be wanted, which means that their basic fear is feeling unwanted or unworthy of love. Some strengths that our type 2 helpers have are that they are very compassionate, very thoughtful, super encouraging, appreciative, and very nurturing. However, their weaknesses, they can have a tendency to people please, to self-serve, kind of martyrish at times, domineering or overbearing. I also wanted to add in that I think the field of speech pathology or teaching in general is like naturally a helping profession. And so we can sometimes mistype as a 2, or we might mistype other people as a 2. Same thing for parents. Most parents are very encouraging, compassionate, and nurturing of their children. And so they're channeling some of these qualities here. The type 2 is called the helper because they're either the most generous and helpful person, or they're deeply invested in seeing themselves as being helpful. So let's hop over here. As a type 2, your wings can either be a 1, which we just talked about, or a 3, which is coming next. And then in growth, you move, instead of being prideful or very people-pleasing, you become more self-nurturing and emotionally aware. And then in a state of stress, you move to 8, which can be a little more aggressive and dominating. So here's some coaching and buy-in tips for our type 2 helpers. As SLPs, 2s may want to ask teachers and parents what it is they need help with before just doing it for them. Like, type 2s really want to help, and a lot of times they are very helpful, but you can take a step back and remember, I can ask what would be the most helpful for them before I just dive in and help. And that's something that I ask teachers that I work with pretty often. I'm looking at my notes. Some things that I hear in my head that I say very often when I show up in a classroom is, what would be the most helpful thing for me to do while I'm in here today? Like, if I don't have a plan, or if I can tell there's just a lot of chaos or behaviors going on in the classroom, like, how can I be the most helpful, or how can I help? For teachers and paras, 2s tend to create a very positive classroom environment that supports connection, and I would definitely consider doing some small group opportunities with them, maybe helping them structure their classroom routine so that you have different stations and you can kind of float around and give them that like one-on-one nurturing type attention a little bit more. And then for parents, 2s are great at giving their children positive reinforcement and meeting their needs. They may have a tendency to step into the role of fixer and need help stepping back at times. So we don't want to give too much positive reinforcement, or we don't want to meet the child's needs too much, because we want to give them an opportunity to communicate, and we don't want to fix that for them, especially when they're learning AAC and they need some extra time to generate like a sentence or something like that. So, oops, moving my slides around here by accident. Type 3, that's me. Okay, and I think I saw some other type 3s in the Slack channel. So forgive me if I sound a little biased while I'm presenting on these next few slides, because this is probably the number that I've studied the most, because it is what I relate to the most. Type 3s are the achiever. I wrote in my notes, you know, the question in interviews that they ask you when they say like, what is your best quality or your best attribute? And then like, what's your worst quality or your worst attribute? And you never know what to answer. I joke that my answer is the same for both of them. So my best attribute is that nobody will work harder than me. And my worst attribute is that nobody will work harder than me. Our basic desire as a 3 is to feel valuable and to be admired. And our fear is being worthless and failing. I tell my husband all the time, like, I'm afraid of failing, like little things, not big things. Like if I'm like, I'm looking at my dishes right now. That's why I'm laughing. If I'm looking to get in a better habit of keeping up with my dishes and not letting my sink fill up, and I tell myself like, you have a goal to not have dishes in your sink, I will bust my butt to meet that goal, but I will be so afraid of failing at that goal the entire time. And it really, really, really stresses me out sometimes. Our strengths as 3s, we are very ambitious, we are highly efficient, we are successful, we are desirable, and we are very energetic. However, our weaknesses are that we can have a tendency to be vain. We are workaholics, we are very image conscious, we are self-promoting at times, and can be very needy. Moving over to the wings. So here's 3. So a type 3's wing will either be a 2 or a 4 both of them, neither of them, but those are your two options for wings. And then our growth number is moving toward a 6. And instead of being very self-promoting and vain, we move toward being more cooperative and working with others better. And then my stress number is a 9, which instead of being very ambitious and successful, I become very disengaged, very apathetic. And a great example of that is the pandemic. I told my husband I was really stressed out today about this presentation, or a little anxious about it. Maybe a little stressed is the right word, because I haven't done a video or a presentation since AAC in the Cloud last summer, which was like right at the very beginning of the pandemic. And if I'm being really vulnerable with you guys right now, like the pandemic was really hard for me, really hard. And I think I will get into this a little bit more later in the presentation if we have time, but I was living in this type 9 stress number, which was really hard for somebody who is like such a type 3 and coming from being such a healthy type 3 before the pandemic. I'd say around October, November of 2020, it was just like highest stress zone, burnt out hard, had to work with a life coach for about 6 months just to work on myself and achieve some things for myself to get back to a more healthy place. But yeah, just giving that as an example. And then a good example of a 3 moving away from like these self-promoting, workaholic, image conscious, growing into being more cooperative with others. A good example of that for me as a type 3 is probably me growing as an AAC specialist in the district that I work for. I think when I first started with AAC, that was something that I was good at, and I didn't quite know yet how that integrated with the rest of a team. Being able to work cooperatively with others and build capacity, not be so image conscious of like, you are the specialist, you know the most about AAC. And I think I'm going to shout out somebody else's presentation later, but there was a really great presentation today about building capacity. And so I need to personally go watch the replay for that, but that has been a huge part of my growth as a 3 is learning to work cooperatively with others and build capacity with a team. So coaching and buy-in tips for our 3s. Let me know in the Slack channel if I've got any 3s listening in right now. For SLPs, 3s tend to work to exhaustion. Remember that it's important to work cooperatively with others and that you are not defined by what you accomplish, but who you are. My husband reminds me of that very often, that it's okay if you didn't finish every item on your checklist today. You are not defined. Your worth does not come from what you accomplished today, but who you are. For teachers and paras, 3s tend to have very clearly defined expectations in the classroom, and they set the bar high for growth and success with AAC, which could be really great. But like I said, workaholics, we can burn ourselves out hard. So watch out for that. And as parents, 3s are natural cheerleaders and coaches. They're success oriented and should be careful not to push too many goals on their child at once. If you have a parent show up in an IEP meeting with like a list of 10 goals that they found online or that they developed, which is great. I love when parents bring goals to the table. They might be a type 3 though, if they have like a lot of goals and really high expectations. The Buckeye SLP says, if I'm not exhausted, did I accomplish anything? Yes, you did, Kara. Yes, you did. You cannot do all the things all the days and do it all well. Just remember that if you're a type 3. Oops, Siri's picking up on what I'm saying. All right, type 4s, individualist. All right, basic desire is to be themselves and to create an identity. Basic fear is having no identity or no significance. Your strengths as a type 4 is that you're very introspective, individualistic, emotionally honest and sensitive. And your weakness is that you're sometimes moody or self-deceptive, hypersensitive, self-conscious, or depressed at times. My description of a type 4 is like a very beautiful, emotionally in touch person. They tend to have very beautiful environments and spaces that they work in. And they just feel like really in touch with who they are. And that's what their like goal is. They're sometimes told that they're too much or that they're not enough. So it's like one or the other. Wings for type 4, either the type 3, which we just went over, or type 5. And then in growth, a 4 might move to a 1. So instead of being so hypersensitive and self-conscious, they are growing and moving to be more objective and principled. And in stress, they might move to a type 2, like the negative traits of a type 2 being like too over-involved or too clingy or too moody or something like that. Coaching and buy-in tips for a type 4. 4s as SLPs, we tend to wait until they have it all together before they take on a challenge. And so my tip for you is to be careful. Action over perfection is something that I forgot to include in there, but be careful not to make up stories in your mind also, especially if they're very negative. Just click back here for a minute. You can be kind of moody or self-conscious or hypersensitive to feedback sometimes. And so this is really important for you. Don't make up stories in your mind about how something went, whether it was a coaching session or a push-in session or an evaluation or a phone call with a parent. Keep it out of your head, especially if it's negative. As teachers and paras, 4s have classrooms that encourage a lot of self-expression and creativity. I think these types of teachers love like social emotional learning and helping kids express emotions. And as parents, 4s love to share the things they love with their children. But my tip is to be careful to avoid putting things off, such as modeling AAC until you're in the mood. A note that I wanted to touch on was that sometimes 4s can have a tendency and have a hard time of letting go of things that happened in the past. And my note for how that relates to AAC is that sometimes if a type 4, whether you're a teacher, SLP, parent, whoever, has had a negative experience with AAC before, that can really impact the buy-in that you're getting with them now. So for example, like if I'm an SLP, I'm a type 3, I'm working with a type 4 teacher who, I don't know, somebody was really bossy with how they were recommending AAC in their classroom. They may have those negative thoughts playing in their mind and be really turned off to somebody else kind of infringing on their space and making recommendations. Or as a parent, maybe you came from a district or a clinic where it was taking 6 months to get an AAC device. And so their negative experience is that like, this just takes too long. And so you recommend AAC and the parent might be like really frustrated and maybe not even want to deal with that, or they're avoiding it because they're not in the mood to deal with something that takes a lot of arguing or will take 6 months to get, when that's not even really the case a lot of the time. So some tips there. All right, moving right along. I don't want to run out of time. Type 5s are investigators. Their basic desire is to be capable and to be competent. Their basic fear is being useless, incapable, or incompetent. Your strengths as a type 5 are that you are very innovative, you're inventive, you are an intellectual, very specialized and independent. Some weaknesses are that you can have a tendency to be antagonistic, argumentative, high-strung, intense, or arrogant. Your wings, you have the option of type 4 or type 6 wing. And in growth, you move to an 8, where instead of being very argumentative and high-strung, you become more self-confident and decisive. You are really great at making decisions, whereas sometimes 5s can get really, really stuck on the research. They want to learn and research as much as they can and ask questions before they move forward with implementing something such as AAC. In stress, 5s move toward a 7. Instead of being very specialized and independent and decisive, they tend to have a tendency to become hyperactive and almost like scatterbrained. Some coaching and buy-in tips for our 5s. As SLPs, 5s tend to be intensely involved in learning about AAC, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but remember that taking messy action will bring more confidence than learning more facts will. So go do the dang thing and don't worry about researching it until you're blue in the face. Research is still good though. I think I have a little bit of 5 in me. As teachers and paras, 5s have very quiet classrooms that are really ideal for learning. They create long-term plans for success and they do their research. And as parents, 5s can tend to put an emphasis on exploration and discovery, which when we think of AAC, that is a great thing to have. They are very patient with curiosity. They enjoy conversation, but they may also find it difficult to trust their child's teacher and SLP right away. Moving on to type 6, the loyalist. Type 6 basic desire is to have security and to be supported. Their basic fear is to be without support and guidance and insecurity. Their strengths are that they are very vigilant, dedicated, loyal, trustworthy, and they have a very cooperative spirit. And their weaknesses are that they can sometimes be panicky, highly suspicious, sarcastic, defensive, paranoid, or anxious. This number is where I move in growth. So I have some of these strengths here, like trustworthiness, cooperative spirit, working with others. My husband moves to a 6 in stress, and so he becomes all of these things down here. And he knows that about himself. So this type 6, like insecure, anxious personality, something really good that you can ask yourself. You might be asking yourself, what could go wrong? Like this, that's like the anxious, paranoid type 6 all the time is like, what could go wrong? What could go wrong? You have to make a plan so that nothing goes wrong. Instead of asking yourself that, ask yourself, what could go right? You have the option of a wing 5 or a wing 7. In growth, you move toward the positive traits of a 9. Instead of being so anxious and defensive, you become more relaxed and more optimistic. And in stress, you move to the negative characteristics of a 3, where you become very competitive and very arrogant. Our coaching and buy-in tips for 6s. As SLPs, 6s invest their time into what they perceive as safe and stable. They tend to feel anxious under stress, and they should try to keep in mind that others think better of them than they realize. Like, don't become so paranoid that when you leave a classroom, they're talking about you or that they don't want you there. That's something to keep in mind if you're a 6. Something that my husband has worked on with his life coach when he moves into a 6 in stress is asking himself the question, who is the author of the story you're telling yourself? So 6s have a tendency to tell themselves stories in their heads. And so pause sometimes and ask yourself, who is the author of the story that I'm telling myself right now? And most of the times it's you. It's not actually truth to what somebody else is saying. As teachers and paras, 6s create highly predictable and routine classrooms. They work best with people they can trust and who will not change their plans too much. My sister is a type 6 teacher, and so I asked her if this was an accurate description, and she said yes. She does not like to work with other people. So I can only imagine that if I were an SLP trying to push into her classroom, what kind of conflict we might have there. And just to keep that in mind, when you're working with type 6 teachers, they have predictable and routine classrooms, and they might not be cool with you just showing up. Maybe have a consult time where you can really schedule yourself in there and they can feel prepared for that. And as parents, 6s are very hardworking, very dependable. They sometimes have a hard time relinquishing control to other caregivers, and their kids often feel very safe and very well taken care of. Type 7s, the enthusiast. Type 7s are a lot of fun. And I think I saw in the Slack channel, we have a couple type 7s in here. Their basic desire is to be content and to be satisfied, and their fear is being deprived or in pain. Oftentimes that's more of like an emotional pain than anything. So think of like if you plan like an epic session and it's like an epic fail, like the emotional pain of like replaying that in your head is like something you want to avoid at all costs. Their strengths are that they are very enthusiastic, very multi-talented, cheerful, and spontaneous people. I have a lot of fun when I am surrounded by a type 7. Their weaknesses are that they can sometimes be self-centered, a little demanding, uninhibited, and they have little follow-through sometimes. Your wing options as a type 7 are either a 6 or an 8. In growth, you move to a 5. Instead of being so uninhibited with little follow through, you become more focused and fascinated. Whereas in stress, you might move to a type 1 where you become more perfectionistic and critical in your thinking. So some coaching tips and buy-in tips for our 7s. As SLPs, 7s love to have choices and options. They are generalists who are good at many things, and they love to make AAC activities more fun. And I appreciate that, because that is not how my brain works at all. And I love ideas and fun activities from other SLPs who are better at that. As teachers and paras, 7s are lively and highly interactive with their students. You will almost always know when you enter a type 7's classroom. It's usually pretty loud in there. They are often found multitasking, venturing off the lesson plan in the name of fun. And as parents, 7s are fun-loving and spontaneous. They're adventurous. They enjoy taking risks. The 7 parent, like in a parent of 2, that 7 parent may be seen as the good cop in that relationship. So keep that in mind as an SLP or teacher. If you're sitting in an IEP meeting with a parent who you think is a 7, that's the good cop parent in the situation. The other may not be a bad cop, or they might. So there's our 7s. I'm kind of speeding through these since we are going to run out of time, and I know I can go a little bit over because we started a little late, but in the Slack channel, I'm happy to take questions or comments like as we're going and kind of weave them in, or we can wait till the end and see what kind of time we have left. Or if you want to chime in with some things that you know about each type as we go through the last couple here, that would be fantastic. All right, type 8s are the challengers. And I'm going to be completely honest, I think this might be the number that I have the hardest time interacting with. And I think it's because I've had a negative experience with a type 8 in the past, and I have a hard time letting that go. But their basic desire is to be in control and to protect themselves. Their fear is being harmed or controlled by others. Some strengths of a type 8 are that they are very self-confident. They can be very authoritative. They're a natural born leader, and they can be protective. And their weaknesses are that they have a tendency to be combative, intimidating, boastful, egocentric, and delusional. I'm like, even reading those words triggers me a little bit, because I told you as a type 3, my stress number is a 9, which we'll get to on the next slide, and you'll understand better why somebody who is combative and intimidating, which stresses me out, is not a great thing. But for now, 8s, your wing can either be a 7 or a 9. When you are growing, you are moving toward a type 2. Instead of being so intimidating and boastful, you become more open-hearted and caring. And in stress, you move toward the negative qualities of a 5, and you can become secretive and fearful. What type is this? Type 8 make great leaders. They tend to go with their guts. They're just very authoritative and confrontational at times. Here's some tips for our 8s. As SLPs, 8s are self-sufficient and can dominate an environment. So be careful of not seeing teachers and paras as equals. There is power in building capacity. Here's where I was going to plug in the other presentation. Rachel Langley and Marlene Cummings, they have a presentation on building capacity from earlier today. Definitely recommend everybody goes to watch that, especially if you're a type 8. As teachers and paras, 8s are decisive and independent in a classroom with fair rules. You'll find a lot of engagement happening in their classrooms. And as parents, 8s are firm leaders who speak very directly. They can tend to have big personalities and can become challenging and defensive at times. But I think they're a great person to have on your side when you're implementing and introducing AAC, because they will follow through with that. And our last type is the type 9, the peacemaker. This is my husband. Ooh, a fly just zipped right past my face and grabbed my attention for a minute. This is my husband all the time, most of the time. And this is me in a state of stress, like more of the weakness areas of this. Our desire is to be at peace and to have inner stability. And the fear is of loss or separation or of conflict, which now, does that make sense? Like type 8s can be combative or intimidating, and type 9s, they fear conflict. Like they just don't get along very well sometimes. Their strengths are that they are very emotionally stable, optimistic, supportive, and a calming influence in a group or a team. And their weaknesses are that they can be very stubborn, neglectful, procrastinate a ton, disengaged, and inattentive. Wing options for a 9 or a type 8 or a type 1. In growth, they move towards some of the positive traits of a 3. They become very self-developing and energetic. And in stress, move to a type 6, where they become more anxious and worried. And so I'm just going to give the example of my husband and myself, but this could translate to an SLP teacher relationship or a teacher-parent relationship also. As a type 3, I think that I helped my type 9 husband grow into some of those strengths. And then him as a type 9, and that as my stress number, I think he gives me a really good example of what a healthy type 9 can look like. Because remember, if I'm moving to type 9 in stress, I'm accessing some of these weakness areas and the things that we are very fearful of. And so I think we make a great team in that regard. Some coaching and buy-in tips for our type 9s. As SLPs, 9s fall into conventional roles and expectations. They avoid conflict and will do anything to keep the peace in the classroom. Just be aware of your feelings. For teachers and paras, 9s have very stress-free and comfortable classrooms. They're pretty easygoing and enjoy working together in harmony. And as parents, 9s are agreeable and laid back. They lean toward peace, so they may have a hard time saying no or following through with some things. That wraps up our types. I want to share with you guys some Enneagram resources that I have found really valuable in my time I've spent learning about the Enneagram. You could take a free test at this website here, eclecticenergies.com. I think there's 2 different versions there. One's like a shorter version. It's more like a yes or no. Another one's a longer version. That's the one I recommend. That always seems to give very accurate results, in my opinion. To learn more about your type, I would jump over to this website, Enneagram Institute. They also have a test on their website, but it costs money. So go take the free version of the test. And then a lot of the information that I pulled for this presentation came from Enneagram Institute. It will also give you a lot of information about how certain types interact with other types. So if you're like, okay, I know I'm a type 6 and I know that the teacher I work with is type 3, like how do we get along and how can we get along better? A lot of that information you can find there. A book recommendation for you guys. Last year I gave 2 book recommendations. So I just have one for you. And I quoted Ian Morgan Cron at the beginning. The book is called The Road Back to You. It goes through all 9 types. It's by Ian Morgan Cron and Suzanne Stabile. Some Instagram accounts that you can follow. These are not AAC or SLP related accounts at all. This is just to learn more about the Enneagram. Like I said, it's a little unconventional, but after the year that we've had where I did a lot of self-reflection and learning about myself as a person, I think it's really important for a lot of us to be more aware of who we are and what our type might be, what our strengths are, what our weaknesses are, and try to come out of that box that the Enneagram puts us in or that we're already in. And if you like listening to podcasts, Typology is Ian Morgan Cron's podcast. The Enneagram Journey is a great podcast, and Enneagram and Coffee. And if you would like to connect more with me, this is where you can find me. Feel free to email me, hello@emilydiazslp.com. I'll try my best to respond in like 2 to 3 business days is kind of my processing speed right now. I get a lot of emails and sometimes I just kind of tune out when I'm in stress. I become disengaged as a type 9. Remember, I'm working on that. I'm working on healing this burnout from the school year. You can find more information and resources for AAC on my website, emilydiazslp.com. I have a full free resources library that I'm continually adding to. I'll have some workshops, webinars, and courses coming up in this next school year. So make sure you check that out on the website if you need to get on a wait list to get more information about that. And where I hang out most of the time is on Instagram. You can find me there as Emily Diaz SLP. See what I'm up to this summer. Watch some of my IGTV videos. You can find me on YouTube too. I haven't put that on here, but there's a lot of training videos, shorter ones on there also. And that about wraps it up. I don't see any questions real time, but if we have a couple minutes right now, I tried to end on time, even though we started a little bit late and I rushed through. Any questions? We can take some right now. And if not, we are good to end and everyone can enjoy their evening.
Emily, why don't we wait a second and see if there's any questions? There is a slight delay
Absolutely.
between your presentation.
Good to know.
So let's just see if anyone types in any questions.
Cool.
Okay, Emily, I'm not seeing any more questions.
That's great. That's fine.
In Slack. So we want to thank Emily for her presentation today and everyone for taking time for this session of AAC in the Cloud, and encourage you to check out the other presentations tomorrow. Thanks everyone for your time today.